This tutorial is on IP spaces and broadcast domains. What's an IP space? An IP space is a cluster-wide container that can hold one or more broadcast domains. Now, what's a broadcast domain? A broadcast domain is a cluster-wide group of physical and/or virtual ports. In the diagram, you see a simple representation of what this could look like. We see a single IP space with a single broadcast domain, and that broadcast domain holds 2 ports in total, 1 port from each node. After cluster setup, there are 2 IP spaces, the cluster IP space and the default IP space. Each IP space has its own broadcast domain by the same name. The cluster broadcast domain contains 2 ports per node. This IP space and broadcast domain is reserved for the cluster interconnect. So if you have a 4-node cluster, you will have 8 ports in the cluster broadcast domain. The other IP space is the default IP space with the default broadcast domain. All other ports in your cluster will be in the default broadcast domain by default. You can add new broadcast domains to the default IP space and create VLAN collections and other ports in new broadcast domains if you like. Now, can you have more IP spaces? Yes, you can. When you create an IP space, all you do is give it a name. It's an empty container. Then you create 1 or more broadcast domains to which you can add ports. To make a long story short, the only reason why you would want to have a second or third IP space with their own broadcast domains is when you have customers with overlapping IP ranges. So imagine you have 2 customers, and both customers want to use subnet 10.10.100.0 with a mask of 24. Then you cannot host them in the same IP space because these are conflicting subnets. If you would place them in a separate IP space with a broadcast domain in each IP space, then you could service both customers. So the function of different IP spaces is that you can have the same IP addresses and the same IP ranges and the same subnets in different IP spaces. Very often you don't even notice that you have IP spaces and broadcast domains because you use the default IP space and the default broadcast domain, and if you want to split customers, you simply use VLANs. Now, some important notes to keep in mind. A broadcast domain automatically has its own failover group. So all the ports in one broadcast domain belong to one failover group. This means that if you create an IP address in the form of a LIF and connect it to a port in a particular broadcast domain, then that IP address can only fail over, so that LIF, logical interface, can only fail over to another port in the same broadcast domain. Also, the MTU size, or maximum transfer unit size, is no longer determined at the port level, but at the broadcast domain level. So all ports in the same broadcast domain will have the same MTU size. A port can only be in one single broadcast domain, so you can't have one single port in 2 different broadcast domains. And a broadcast domain can also have a subnet. This is optional. You don't have to do that. Now, what will we do in the tutorial? We will create a new IP space. In that IP space, we will create a broadcast domain, and we'll put 2 VLAN ports in that broadcast domain, 1 for each node in the cluster. And we'll give the broadcast domain a subnet. And as with all the other modules, we'll first do it with the CLI, and then we use OnCommand System Manager to do that.